What comes to mind when you hear the word ark? Most likely, an ordinary wooden box used to hold things. But what if this ark were the Ark of the Covenant, and what was really inside it? When we read the Bible, we see that some of the things said to be inside the ark can be confusing. It even causes us to re-examine some information we've believed to be true for years. What was really inside? To understand this, let's first look at what the ancient texts tell us. Before examining what happened to the ark, it is worth being precise about what it was, because the popular image is significantly different from what the biblical text actually describes. The ark is not primarily a weapon, a power source, or a navigation device, as various popular accounts have proposed. The biblical text describes it as a container, a chest, whose function was institutional and religious rather than supernatural. Exodus 25:10-22 provides the most detailed physical description. The chest was to be made of acacia wood, a hardwood native to the Sinai Midian desert region, overlaid inside and out with pure gold. The dimensions given, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high, correspond to approximately 115 centimeters by 69 centimeters by 69 centimeters using the most common ancient Near Eastern cubit measurement. This is a large, heavy object. A solid acacia wood chest of these dimensions, covered in gold inside and out, would have weighed several hundred kilograms. The lid of the ark, the kaporet in Hebrew, translated as mercy seat or atonement cover, is described separately from the chest itself. It was to be made of pure gold, not gold-covered wood, and was to have 2 golden cherubim mounted on it, facing each other with their wings spread upward and inward over the lid. The space between the cherubim, above the lid, was described as the place where God would meet with Moses and speak to him. The carrying poles were to be made of acacia wood covered in gold, inserted through the 4 gold rings at the corners of the chest, and crucially, never removed. The poles were to remain in the rings at all times, even when the ark was stationary. This permanent carrying apparatus is distinctive. It meant the ark was never set down directly on the ground, but always remained elevated on its poles. The ark's institutional role was also distinctive. It was not a cult statue. There was no image of the deity inside or on it. The cherubim on the lid faced each other and looked down at the empty lid surface, not outward toward worshippers. The space between the cherubim was described as the seat of divine presence, but it was an empty space, not filled by any visible symbol. This combination of institutional elaborateness and visual emptiness is unique in the ancient Near East and represents a fundamental theological statement about the nature of the deity, whose presence the ark was said to mediate. The ark's closest parallel in the ancient world to this combination of features, a portable chest with carrying poles, kept in the innermost sanctuary, approached only by authorized priests, is the Egyptian sacred barque, the divine boat that carried the statue of the god in religious processions. Egyptian sacred barques were also portable, also carried on poles, also kept in the innermost sanctuaries of Egyptian temples, and also approached only by authorized priests. The parallel is not coincidental. Moses grew up in the Egyptian court and would have been familiar with the sacred barque tradition. The contents of the ark are described in Deuteronomy 10:1-5 as the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. 1 Kings 8:9 confirms this when describing the installation of the ark in Solomon's temple. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament describes the ark as containing a gold jar of manna and Aaron's staff that had budded, in addition to the tablets. But this description is inconsistent with the 1 Kings account and appears to reflect a later elaboration of the tradition. The narrative history of the ark in the biblical text covers approximately 4 centuries, from its construction at Sinai to its installation in Solomon's temple, and the account is remarkably detailed about its movements, its custodians, and its institutional role. The ark was constructed at Sinai by craftsmen named Bezalel and Oholiab, working under Moses' supervision. It was housed in the tabernacle, the portable tent sanctuary, during the 40-year wilderness period. The ark was carried ahead of the Israelite community during the wilderness marches, and Numbers 10:33-36 preserves what appear to be ancient liturgical formulas that accompanied its movement and its stopping. The prayer that enemies would scatter when the ark set out, and the prayer for return when it rested. The ark's crossing of the Jordan River in Joshua 3:4 is described as the central ritual event of the entry into Canaan. The priests carrying the ark stood in the riverbed while the waters stopped upstream, allowing the Israelites to cross. The parallel to the Red Sea crossing is deliberate, and both accounts locate the ark as the institutional mediator of the crossing event. The conquest narrative in Joshua centers on the ark's role at Jericho, where it was carried in procession around the city walls for 7 days before the walls fell. This use of the ark in military contexts, as the visible presence of the deity accompanying the army, is consistent with the ancient Near Eastern practice of carrying divine symbols into battle. But the Israelite version makes the ark, rather than a divine statue, the vehicle of divine presence. The period of the Judges sees the ark housed at Shiloh, in a permanent structure that the text calls a temple, under the custody of the priestly family of Eli. The catastrophic Battle of Ebenezer, described in 1 Samuel 4:6, results in the ark's capture by the Philistines, the single most dramatic event in the ark's documented history before its installation in Jerusalem. The Philistine ark narrative is unlike any other section of the biblical text. The ark is taken to Ashdod and placed in the temple of Dagon. The Dagon statue falls before the ark. The population of Ashdod is afflicted with a plague. The ark is moved to Gath, then to Ekron with the same results. After 7 months, the Philistines return the ark to Israelite territory on a cart drawn by untrained cows, with gold-gilt offerings, golden tumors, and golden mice accompanying it. The cows, without any guidance, walk directly to Beit Shemesh and stop. The account reads as a sophisticated theological argument. The ark's power operates even in enemy territory, among people who do not worship its deity, and the return of the ark demonstrates that it came back by divine agency rather than Philistine decision. Whatever the historical kernel of this narrative, it preserves a memory of the ark spending time outside Israelite custody and returning. The Uzzah incident in 2 Samuel 6, in which a man named Uzzah steadied the ark when the cart carrying it lurched and was struck dead for touching it, has been interpreted in multiple ways by biblical scholars. The most straightforward reading treats it as a narrative about the lethal power of the ark when touched by unauthorized persons. A more historical reading sees it as a memory of an accident during the transport operation that was later theologized. What the incident establishes, regardless of interpretation, is that the tradition of the ark's dangerous power was strong enough in the early monarchy period to organize a specific story about a specific person who died in a specific way. This level of narrative specificity suggests a genuine historical memory rather than a purely theological construct. The archaeological evidence for the Kiriath-jearim period has become more substantial in recent years. Israeli archaeologists Israel Finkelstein and Thomas Römer have been excavating at Tel Kiriath-jearim since 2017, identifying it as a major Iron Age site with evidence of significant cultic activity. Finkelstein and Römer propose that Kiriath-jearim, not Jerusalem, was the primary sacred site of early Israelite religion, and that the ark's 20 years there may represent a much more institutionally significant period than the brief narrative in 1 Samuel implies. The ark spent 20 years at Kiriath-jearim before David brought it to Jerusalem in the events described in 2 Samuel 6. The account that includes the death of Uzzah when he steadied the ark with his hand, and the extraordinary dancing of David before the ark as it entered the city. The ark then remained in Jerusalem until its installation in the Holy of Holies of Solomon's temple at the temple's dedication, described in 1 Kings 8. The ark's disappearance from the historical record is one of the most precisely bounded events in the history of ancient Israelite religion, and the boundaries deserve careful examination. The last unambiguous reference to the ark as a present, functional object in the Jerusalem temple is in 2 Chronicles 35:3, which records Josiah's instruction to the Levite priests to return the ark to the temple during his religious reform in 621 BCE. This passage is itself ambiguous. The instruction to put the holy ark in the house implies the ark had been moved from the temple at some point during the reform preparations, but it confirms the ark was in institutional use in Jerusalem as late as 621 BCE. Between 621 BCE and the Babylonian destruction of the temple in 586 BCE, the ark vanishes from every surviving record. The Babylonian account of the 597 BCE deportation, which lists the objects taken from the temple treasury, does not mention the ark. The 2 Kings account of the temple's destruction in 586 BCE describes the destruction of the bronze pillars, the bronze basins, the lampstands, the bowls, the trumpets, and the censers, a detailed inventory of what Nebuchadnezzar's forces removed. The ark is not on the list. This absence is the central mystery. The ark was the most sacred object in the temple. If Nebuchadnezzar had taken it, it would have been the trophy of trophies, the equivalent of the Bayeux tapestry, the most symbolically powerful object the Babylonian king could have displayed. The silence of the Babylonian records about the ark, combined with the silence of the biblical record about its fate, has produced centuries of speculation. The prophetic literature's silence about the ark after the late 7th century BCE is equally significant. Jeremiah, who was active throughout the period between Josiah's reform and the Babylonian destruction, mentions the ark only once in a future-oriented prophecy in Jeremiah 3:16 that says people will no longer talk about the Ark of the Covenant. It will not enter their minds, and they will not miss it. This single reference has been read both as evidence that the ark was already gone when Jeremiah wrote it, and as evidence that Jeremiah was deliberately minimizing the ark's significance in preparation for the new covenant theology he develops elsewhere. Either reading confirms that the ark was not a functioning part of the Jerusalem cult in Jeremiah's period in the way it had been in earlier centuries. 2 Maccabees 2:4-8, a text written in the 2nd century BCE but claiming to preserve an older tradition, describes the prophet Jeremiah hiding the ark, the tabernacle, and the altar of incense in a cave on Mount Nebo, the mountain in Jordan where Moses died before the Babylonian destruction. Jeremiah sealed the cave and told his companions that the location would remain unknown until God gathered his people together again. This is the most specific ancient tradition about the ark's fate, and it has generated archaeological investigation of the Mount Nebo region. The Second Temple, built after the return from Babylon, appears to have been constructed without the ark. The Mishnah records that the Holy of Holies of the Second Temple contained nothing, an empty room where the ark had stood. When the Roman general Pompey entered the Holy of Holies of Herod's temple in 63 BCE, a shocking violation of Jewish religious law, he reported finding the room empty. The ark was not there. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains the world's most persistent institutional claim about the ark's location, and the tradition is more historically sophisticated than its popular treatment often suggests. The primary document for the Ethiopian tradition is the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of Kings, a 14th century Ethiopian literary work that claims to be translating and compiling much older Coptic and Arabic sources. The Kebra Nagast narrates the story of the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon, the birth of their son Menelik, Menelik's visit to Jerusalem to meet his father, and the theft of the ark by Menelik and his companions when they departed for Ethiopia. In the Kebra Nagast account, Solomon's son Menelik is accompanied back to Ethiopia by the sons of the Jerusalem priests. During the night before the departure, the priestly sons replace the ark in the Jerusalem temple with a replica and take the real ark to Ethiopia. Menelik and his companions do not discover until they have left Jerusalem that the ark is with them. It joined the party by its own divine agency. The narrative is clearly a literary composition rather than a historical record, but it encodes a genuine institutional tradition that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained continuously. Every Ethiopian Orthodox Church contains a tabat, a replica of the Ark's tablets, which is carried in procession on major feast days. The tabat is the most sacred object in each church and is treated with the same reverence that the biblical text describes for the original Ark. The specific object claimed to be the Ark is kept in the chapel of the tablet, a small sanctuary adjacent to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. Access is restricted to a single guardian monk, appointed for life, who alone may enter the chapel. No independent verification of the object's identity has been permitted. The British scholar Edward Ullendorff, who claimed to have examined the object during his time in Ethiopia in 1941, reported seeing a wooden chest, but described it as clearly not the ancient Ark described in Exodus. Ullendorff's account has been disputed by Ethiopian church authorities, who maintain that the guardian monk is the only person who has seen the object. The Aksumite kingdom's historical connections to the ancient Levant are genuine and documented independently of the Ark tradition. The Sabaean influence on early Ethiopian culture is visible in the earliest Ethiopian inscriptions and in the architectural forms of the pre-Aksumite period. Ancient South Arabian kingdoms, the most historically plausible identification for the Queen of Sheba's territory, had commercial and cultural connections to both ancient Israel and to the Ethiopian highlands. The ancient port of Adulis on the Red Sea coast of Eritrea was a major commercial hub, connecting the Ethiopian highlands to the Arabian Peninsula and the wider Indian Ocean trading world. The historical argument for the Ethiopian tradition's plausibility rests on several observations. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained this tradition continuously for at least 1,000 years of documented history. The Kingdom of Aksum, the predecessor state to medieval Ethiopia, was a sophisticated and literate civilization fully capable of housing and preserving important objects, and the biblical account of the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon in 1 Kings 10 provides the narrative foundation for the Ethiopian royal family's claimed Solomonic descent, which is the basis for the Ark claim. The Dead Sea Scrolls collection contains one document that is directly relevant to the question of where the temple's sacred objects were hidden before the Babylonian destruction, and it raises more questions than it answers. The copper scroll, discovered in Cave 3 at Qumran in 1952, is unlike every other document in the Dead Sea Scroll collection. It is made of thin sheets of copper rather than leather or papyrus. Its content is not theological, not biblical, and not sectarian. It is a list of 64 locations where treasure is hidden. Enormous quantities of gold, silver, and sacred vessels described in weights that, if taken literally, would represent a concentration of wealth beyond anything that has ever been found in the archaeology of the ancient Levant. The copper scroll's treasure locations are described in terms of geographical features, specific distances from particular landmarks, directions from wells or ruins or rock formations that have never been definitively identified. Multiple expeditions have searched for the locations described and found nothing. The Ark of the Covenant is not specifically named in the copper scroll, but the quantities of sacred vessels and precious metals described in the document are of the scale that would be consistent with temple treasury contents, and the copper scroll has been interpreted by some scholars as a genuine inventory of objects hidden from the Babylonians before the 586 BCE destruction. John Marco Allegro, the controversial Dead Sea Scroll scholar who first published the copper scroll's contents in 1960, proposed that the document was a real inventory of temple treasure hidden in specific Judean desert and Transjordanian locations. His excavations in Jordan found nothing. Subsequent scholarship has been divided between those who see the document as a genuine ancient inventory and those who view it as a literary composition or a hoax. The geographical overlap between some of the copper scrolls described locations and the Mount Nebo region of Jordan, where 2nd Maccabees locates Jeremiah's hiding of the Ark, has been noted by researchers. The overlap is suggestive but not conclusive. The Manchester University physicist Judah Lefkowitz published a comprehensive analysis of the copper scroll in 2000, proposing that the document was a real inventory of objects hidden in a period of crisis, written in a form designed to preserve the location information across generations while keeping the actual locations obscure to anyone who did not have the local knowledge to interpret the geographic references. Lefkowitz's reading makes the document a practical hiding guide rather than a literary composition. And if this reading is correct, the objects it describes were hidden in real locations and may still be there. The astronomical quantities of treasure described in the copper scroll have led some scholars to propose that the document describes not the contents of the Jerusalem temple specifically, but the combined treasuries of multiple Jewish communities that had accumulated wealth over generations. On this reading, the copper scroll represents the inventory of a broader Jewish communal treasury rather than the specific temple vessels, which would mean the Ark is not among the listed objects even if the document is genuine. What the copper scroll establishes beyond reasonable doubt is that the tradition of hiding temple treasures in caves in the wilderness before the Babylonian destruction was alive and specific enough in the Second Temple period to generate a detailed written inventory. Whether that inventory reflects a real hiding operation, a legendary tradition, or an eschatological fantasy remains the central scholarly dispute. The question of the Ark's fate sits at the intersection of archaeology, textual history, and living religious tradition in a way that makes straightforward conclusions difficult. But the evidence does establish certain things with reasonable confidence. The Ark existed as a real object in the Jerusalem temple through at least the period of Josiah's reform in 621 BCE. The physical description in Exodus 25 is consistent with ancient Near Eastern metalworking and woodworking traditions, and the dimensions are practical rather than symbolic. This was a real object that real people carried through a real wilderness. The archaeological parallels with Egyptian sacred barques are genuine, and they support the historicity of the Ark tradition rather than undermining it. The Ark was not among the objects that Nebuchadnezzar's forces looted from the temple in 597 or 586 BCE. This is the most significant archaeological fact in the entire discussion, because the Babylonian records were meticulous about recording significant loot. The absence of the Ark from those records means one of three things. The Ark was hidden before the Babylonians arrived, the Ark was destroyed in the temple fire, or the Ark was taken by someone other than the Babylonians and its removal was not recorded. The Second Temple stood for 5 centuries without the Ark in its Holy of Holies. This is not disputed. The empty room at the center of the most important religious building in the ancient Jewish world is the most eloquent physical expression of the mystery. The Ethiopian tradition is historically real as an institutional claim, maintained continuously by a sophisticated religious tradition for over 1,000 years. It cannot be archaeologically confirmed or denied because independent access to the claimed object has not been permitted. The tradition's historical plausibility increases when read alongside the genuine historical connections between ancient Ethiopia and ancient Israel documented in the biblical text and in external sources. The Copper Scroll and the Mount Nebo tradition together suggest that the hiding of the Ark before the Babylonian destruction was a specific enough possibility in the ancient mind to generate 2 independent literary traditions, one placing the hiding site in Jordan and one placing the Ark in Ethiopia. These traditions are not necessarily contradictory. They may preserve different stages or different community memories of what happened to the most sacred object in ancient Israelite religion. The Temple Mount theory deserves specific mention because it is the most geographically proximate and the most archaeologically inaccessible of all the proposed locations. The underground spaces beneath the Temple Mount platform are extensive and have never been comprehensively surveyed. Charles Warren's 19th-century explorations documented a complex system of tunnels, cisterns, and passages beneath the platform. But the political and religious sensitivity of the site has prevented any systematic modern archaeological investigation of the subterranean spaces. The tradition that the Ark was hidden beneath the Temple Mount before the Babylonian destruction appears in several medieval Jewish sources, and in the Mishnah tractate Shekalim, which describes a story of workers who discovered a passage beneath the temple wood storage area and were prevented from completing their investigation. The story is ambiguous. It may describe a real discovery or a legendary tradition, but it preserves a genuine ancient belief that something significant lay beneath the temple platform. Leon Rittmeyer, the archaeological architect who worked with Benjamin Mazar on the Temple Mount excavations in the 1970s and 1980s, has proposed a specific location for the Ark based on his analysis of the bedrock surface visible beneath the dome of the rock. Rittmeyer identified a rectangular cutting in the bedrock that he proposed matches the dimensions of the Ark, suggesting the Ark rested in a prepared rock-cut niche in the original Holy of Holies floor. If the Ark was hidden beneath this location before the Babylonian destruction, it would still be there, beneath one of the most inaccessible sites in the world. What the evidence cannot establish is a definitive answer. After 3,000 years of searching, the Ark has not been found, or if it has been found, the finding has not been independently verified. The mystery survives because the physical evidence remains incomplete. Do you know what's strange? Despite all the research that's been done, despite all the excavations that have been carried out, the exact location of the Ark of the Covenant is still unknown. Maybe it has completely disappeared over time, or maybe it's still sitting in a place no one can reach. No one can say for sure today. But despite this, people have been searching for it for thousands of years. I think the reason isn't just that it's a valuable chest made of gold. It's the mystery and unanswered questions it leaves behind. Perhaps that is exactly what makes it so fascinating. So, what do you think? Do you think the Ark of the Covenant might actually be hidden somewhere? Or has it completely vanished over time?